I always like to introduce Rudy. That's a treat for me on a Friday. So, welcome everyone. You know, we love having these little lunch breaks with you. We've tried to make sure that the topics each week are the hot topics that matter most to you. And today, we thought that as there's been so much attention on the obvious fact that we all knew about the populations that are left behind in vulnerable communities are always pretty easy to find, right? The people of color, those neighborhoods need support and understanding, and their voices need to help inform whatever comes next. So we thought that it was a great time for us to think about as a sector how the advocates and the nonprofit organizations providing the program support around the community could work better together. So part of the question is, how do we learn from the advocates to mobilize, to listen to our communities, to communicate with each other, so that we can drive change that's most meaningful to them. And I don't know of too many people that have done it better in our city than Rudy. And his passion and just smarts around talking to power and listening to the folks that they're trying to help. I'm just really glad we have this chance to learn from you today, Rudy. And I think the only way for this to be valuable is if you say what you mean, and that we take advantage of the chat box so that any questions that you guys have, let's talk about what we can do together. So you guys may have known Learn. They've been around for 10 years, recently changed their name to Inclusive Action for the City. But you know, the victories that you've had on behalf of the street vendors, getting policy change, getting people right now to write checks and support those folks that are trying to make a living, would be really curious about your advice, your perspective, and I'll turn it over to you, Rudy, and thank you for being available today.
Thank you, Regina. That's nice. I appreciate being invited, and yeah, thanks for being here. And I'm happy that folks are interested in learning about this. Regina, you said something about me sort of talking to power. You said something that implied that I have good relations with people that are in power. And this week I don't feel that way. But and I think in any sort of policy advocacy work, we sort of oscillate between being like the star and the enemy and the opponent. And certainly what's happening right now with the pandemic is has everybody on edge, especially our elected leaders. And so sometimes we rode them the wrong way, but I think that's part of our role. I'm linking an article that just came out in the LA Times that featured some of the work that I'll talk about in a second. It just came out like an hour ago. And I thought it was beautiful because of the way that it captured some of the folks we work with. And so check it out there. At least look at the photos. You don't have to read it now, but check out the pictures because I think that they tell a lot about the work that we do. So I'm just gonna speak for a few minutes and then maybe we could have a discussion together. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about who I am and the organization that I work at. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I'd like to do is talk about some of our advocacy work on behalf of street vendors and with street vendors. And then the third thing that I'd like to do is talk about some of the work that we're doing now. Does that sound okay?
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So I'm going to put it in the chat here about IAC, that's us, street vendor campaign, and 3 about the street vendor emergency fund. So if you all have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box where I'm chatting now. Friends, my name is Rudy. Folks should know that I'm an urban planner by training. When I was a kid, what I wanted to do is get rich. I wanted to make a lot of money. That was my only dream, was to make a ton of money and to take care of my mom, who was a waitress for 35 years. And that's how she took care of my brother and I. She was a single mom. And so my dream was always to get rich and to drive up to her restaurant. She worked at an IHOP, and pull up in my black S-Class Mercedes and pick her up and say, "Mom, this is done. I'm taking care of you. Throw your apron on the floor. Let's get out of here." You know, that was always my dream. And I visualized it. That's why I know I wanted that black S-Class, that S500 Mercedes, you know? And so because of that dream, I went to school, I went to college. I was the first in my family to go to school, and I studied business because I figured, well, you know, I don't know how to get rich, but I think that businessmen are rich. So I'm just going to study business. And I was like a C student, and halfway through undergrad, I went to UC Riverside. I was politicized. I took an ethnic studies course, and I always liked government, and I liked like policy and history, but I never saw how I fit into that. And I was a big fan of Martin Luther King, like all of us. And in high school, I learned about him, and I was like, man, that's great, but I'm not Black. Like, I don't know how I'm part of that community. But in school, I started to learn about people that looked like me that were doing work alongside people like Martin Luther King. And I started to realize that the experiences that I faced in my family were actually really common, that a lot of people that look like me were dealing with the same things, even though we never spoke about it. And that there was reasons why these things were happening to us. There was a very clear political, systemic reasons that our communities were facing what we were facing. And so halfway through undergrad, and I'm just painting the story so you could understand sort of what led me to where I am today. I was just like, oh my God, like I don't want to get rich. Like I need to figure out how we could fight the man. And it changed everything in my career. And so I ended up graduating with a business degree because I couldn't afford to change my major and hang out with all the sociologists and other, you know, revolutionaries in class. I had to stick in the business classes. And then I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I didn't want to go work for the man. So I basically bought time, folks, and went back to school again. I fell upon the study of urban planning because I figured that it's such a general field. I don't know if anybody on this call knows what urban planning is. I still don't know half the time. But urban planning is essentially the study of communities. It's a study of cities and all the different elements within a city. And so I thought this is a great field for me just to learn about everything and see where I fit in. So lo and behold, in grad school at UCLA in planning, I started to realize that, wow, like if I really want to make a difference, I need to understand how money works. So I went through a whole circle in my life of wanting to get rich, not wanting to get rich, and then realizing, wait a minute, we have to figure out how capital works. And it may not be about me getting rich to take care of my mom. It's about all of us getting rich. It's about all of us figuring out where resources are and how we could get them to the hands of the people that need it. And so that was the beginning of my career a long time ago. And my background, after that experience in graduate school, I went to go work at a firm that was working with banks, helping them invest in low-income neighborhoods. That was certainly a journey, and it was a great experience working with some of the big banks that sometimes causes trouble today. I went to go work at the AARP Foundation for a second, and then I did some work at a nonprofit in South LA. And throughout that time, I co-founded this organization that I now work at, that, as Regina mentioned, when we founded, it was called Learn and is now called Inclusive Action. So I was one of the founders about 11 years ago, and I was the first employee of the organization. So I just celebrated my 7-year anniversary as executive director last month. And I can't believe I'm still here. And I think about quitting every single week. And I still, and I kind of, you know, convince myself that this is the pathway the best pathway for me at the moment. I'm sure a lot of folks on the call can relate to that. So what does Inclusive Action do? The first thing that we do is we do policy advocacy. So we believe that the conditions of our communities are such because there's policies that have created them. That's pretty much it. That the playing field that we're operating in is designed for us to lose. And when I say us, it's really vulnerable neighborhoods, communities of color, historically disenfranchised communities that we all work for. The system, the playing field is designed for us to lose. And so in order for us to change this playing field, we need to change the policies, the legislation that creates the platforms, right? And so we believe firmly in that. We do research on issues that are impacting low-income neighborhoods, and then we educate our elected officials on how they could change those policies and help the folks that they represent. So that's a really key thing that we do. And I'm going to talk about the LA Street Vendor Campaign. It's one of the big policies that we worked on over the last decade. But policy is really important. Okay. So let me put that in the chat box here. Everybody should be involved in some sort of policy advocacy in some way. Okay. Now, the second priority of the organization is economic development. So we believe that legislation is super important, that we need to pass good policy to make sure that neighborhoods are taken care of and that we have our, we're leveling the playing field as much as possible, right? But we don't think that that's enough. And there's a lot of laws that are put into place that, are there, but they're not enforced, or there's no resources to implement them properly. And that's why there's a second division of inclusive action. We have an economic development division that thinks about money and how to get money to people. And we administer programs that get money into the hands of families and businesses. One of the big programs is our microloan program called the Semilla Fund that came out of the policy work. And that's a key thing that I want to emphasize, that the economic development program came out of the advocacy work. Vendors were telling us, hey, well, Rudy, if we ever legalize street vending, how are we going to afford the carts? They're so expensive. And the vendor, for example, the vendor behind me in my photo there, that cart is not cheap, right? And so there's a concern that who's going to give us a loan to us, undocumented vendors, folks that don't have collateral, things like that. And we realized that they were right. And so we created a loan fund to provide capital to them. And so over the years, we've deployed over $500,000 in low interest loans. And we've also provided business coaching that we think is a really key thing. We've done some micro equity investments in businesses and communities because we realize that they don't have a network of folks that could give them patient capital into their businesses. We know that over 80% of small businesses start with friends and family money. And, our folks don't have that friends and family that could hook them up with a little bit of something for their idea. And so, and then the last cool project that we've been involved with is around commercial real estate. The businesses that we see in our communities are often tenants in their buildings. And so when a neighborhood is changing, the landlords, if they see someone that's going to pay them more money and they don't have a lease, they're going to get somebody else in there. And we see that happening in neighborhoods that are changing, like where I live in Highland Park. I mean, the small businesses have been displaced a great deal because many of them didn't have leases, and there isn't any rent control and protection for commercial tenants. So what we did is we partnered with a couple of organizations last year to organize money and buy buildings on the east side. And we bought 5 buildings last year, and the goal is to preserve the small businesses that are there. Okay. So now, again, 2 things. The number one thing is that policy is very important, and that's a big focus. But the second thing is our economic development programs. And so I'll put that here too, that money is important too. And policy and economic development should work together. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm almost done with my overview.
Aaron's in charge of watching the chat. I'd be curious how you make that transition if you've been focused on providing service to people, how you shift some of your time, some of your resources to try and take what you know and move that to a policy position.
Yeah, it's a good question. So my team at Inclusive Action is relatively small. It's a team of 7 full-time team members. We have a couple of part-timers. We have 1 vacant position that we were going to fill, but then a pandemic happened, so that's on hold. But every person on my team has a certain expertise, So like Lyric is a policy person. She leads our policy initiatives. Maribel is the lead on our loan fund, so her expertise is more on that side of the house. But each person that's on our team is a little bit of a generalist, in that they understand that they can't solely be on their side of the house, that they have to be, they have to have an ear to the other side of the house. And we work together. So it's kind of seamless, Regina. It's not uncommon for Lyric to be monitoring a policy effort and say, oh my God, this is relevant to our clients. Hey, Maribel, I want to just signal this to you. Right now in the pandemic, there's a lot of people getting eviction notices. So our loan fund clients are getting these. They're struggling on the personal side too. So there's this conversation happening of like, hey, I'm tracking what the city council is doing or not doing on eviction moratoriums. I want to make sure that you have the best information to provide our clients. So it's really seamless, but I think it's part of the way that we've hired team members, that we hire team members that are interested in thinking about things in a comprehensive way, and that they understand that our folks have comprehensive, diverse needs. The storytelling and the narrative piece is also a part of that. So I think that that's one of the things we talk about too is, hey, you're dealing with the client. They may share like, I can't believe it, guys. Like, can you believe that Regina like is struggling with this? And what do we do to help her? And we have a conversation about how do we lift up those stories together to make sure that that's informing our policy work, right? As we support them programmatically.
So that seems accessible to anybody. It seems like it's communicating among your team about what are you seeing on the ground, and then who should we be sharing that with?
Correct. Yes, totally.
Sorry, Aaron, I stepped into your job. Oops, I'll stop doing that now.
No problem.
Yeah, are there any other questions before I talk about some of our concrete? I want to talk about the street vendor campaign and then our emergency fund.
Yeah, in general, please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them as we go. You're also welcome to raise your hand either digitally or actually. But I want to give it a second if anybody's got questions for Rudy here. Otherwise, we'll keep going. I'm excited to hear more about the emergency relief fund for sure. Got one question coming in from CNM's very own Alicia Avalos. If an organization is not focused on policy and doesn't have funds to hire, are there ways in which an organization can become involved?
Yes, I think that there's a lot of ways that folks can get involved. And I think, Regina mentioned that we changed our name recently, and we did that. It was part of our 10-year anniversary. We were reflecting on who we were and what we've become. And we chose the word inclusive because we recognize that every single initiative that we've done has been done in partnership with other people. And the reason why is because we're a small team. And so in order to really leverage our impact, we have to work together. And we really pride ourselves on being open source and sharing everything that we do. And I think that it's the same for policy work. So there's oftentimes where we can't take the lead on something, and we have to really just have a really open and invest in a relationship with another organization that does have that. And so Alicia, that may mean that your organization may not be the lead on the policy effort, but you're helping in another way. Maybe you're providing stories to that policy lead that they can use on the advocacy front. Or maybe you're so busy, but you can only show up to the city council meeting that one day to tell your story, and then that's enough. And I think that those roles are really important because it diversifies the body of advocates, because the elected officials start to see Rudy all the time, every single day. They're just like, they start tuning me out. But, Alicia, if you show up one day, they're like, oh, who's this? This is a new person. And I think that there's a role to play, even given the limited resources we have. So let me share on that note, though, it's a good queue up question to on the policy front. One of the key things that the case studies that I wanted to share with you is the LA Street Vendor Campaign. So it was one of the first projects we worked on as an organization. We were doing a research on the Great Recession, 2008. And we were interested in, because we're nerds, we were interested in what was happening in neighborhoods from an economic standpoint. And we were like, man, street vendors are still hustling out here trying to make it happen. Like, what's going on with them? And so we did a survey of vendors on the east side. We went out, I just can't believe it myself sometimes, that we literally went out as a volunteer board on a Saturday 12 years ago to survey street vendors. It was so nerdy. And we would talk to them and say, hey, what's going on? And we recognize one of the things they said is like, man, it's hard out here, but it's also like we're getting citations. And we recognize that one of the key things that they were facing was the fact that the city of Los Angeles was one of the only major cities in the country that did not have a permit system for sidewalk vendors. And it surprised a lot of people because either vendors are synonymous with LA's street culture and our DNA, the DNA of our city. And so a lot of people were shocked. And so we thought, man, we really need to lift this up. And as a result of that recognition, we started connecting, and this is again to Alicia's question, connecting with other organizations that were interested in this too. We reached out to East LA Community Corporation that around the same time was getting calls from street vendors that were going to their offices saying, hey, we're having trouble. We connected with people at the LA Food Policy Council. We connected with Chidla. We connected with a variety of different groups that said, hey, we see this too. It's, it's not just you guys, like what do we do to work together? And what we did is we decided to form a coalition that ended up becoming the LA Street Vendor Campaign. And the purpose of this campaign was to legalize street vending in LA, plain and simple. We wanted to create a permit system that was informed by the experiences of street vendors and that took care of them. And so, I won't bore you all with the details of this process, but I'll just give you some headlines. It took us 10 years to pass this legislation that finally was passed in 2018. It took us 2 years or so to find a council champion. For folks that are not familiar with local LA government, the city council is what it's kind of like Congress creates the laws and then the mayor signs them once they're approved. And it was difficult to find a champion. It took us a couple of years to find a council champion to introduce this concept. It was stuck in committees for 3 or 4 years. They just kept punting. Oh, well, yeah, Rudy, it's not the right time to do this, or I don't think anybody wants to legalize street vending. They just kept punting us down the line. It was terrible. And we finally got some momentum when we elected our current president. Because at the end of 2016, when he was elected, and on the platform of this anti-immigrant rhetoric, local elected officials said, wait a minute, this is not good. We should do something to fight back. And street vending was one of the things that they said, you know what, we could latch ourselves onto this. And so, we, throughout this whole process, did several things. The first thing that I'll mention that comes to mind is that we were super, super prepared. It was like the smartest people in the city working on this stuff. We always had very clear policy proposals and recommendations that the city council can act on that day if they wanted to. Those proposals were informed by community members. Number two, the community members and the street vendors were part of the process throughout the whole time. We had a steering committee of organizations where vendors were part of, and then every single time there was a political move, we went back to the vendors and said, hey, what do you guys think about this? This is our council, but you guys are the final decision makers. So that's a very key thing. And then the third thing is we told the story as best as we can. We were always constantly sharing stories on social media, but also interacting with the press. They were really intrigued with the fact that a city like Los Angeles was criminalizing street vendors, giving them misdemeanor penalties. And under the current administration, a misdemeanor penalty puts you as a high priority for deportation if you happen to be undocumented, which many street vendors are. So, so those things got us to 2018, where we not only legalized street vending in LA, but we helped pass a statewide legislation, Senate Bill 946, that decriminalized street vending throughout the state of California. And so all these things happened all at once that year, but it was as a result of all the many years of preparation and work that led up to that place. Because when the elected officials were ready to move, we were ready, day one. When they said, okay, we're gonna move on this now to fight against Trump, we're like, here's a stack of recommendations, we're ready to go. You need stories, you need vendors to show up at City Hall, we're ready to go. And that was those are key levers that were pushed that got us to the legalization effort in 2018. Now I will say, just like with anything, friends, we were successful, but we knew it was just the beginning. That implementation is a whole other thing, and we've been experiencing that. 2019 was weird, and it was like a lot of confusion. And then 2020, just this past year in January, they started to release issuing permits to vendors, which is good, something we advocated for. But of course, it's been really haphazard, and there's been a lot of confusion. And then the pandemic has made everything worse, because the city council, used the pandemic to say we need to ban all unlicensed vendors again until this is all over. And so that's causing a lot of fear with street vendors. But that's a recap of one initiative on the policy side of inclusive action that I'm really proud of, and that a lot of amazing people worked on teams. So again, it was about collaboration. East LA Community Corporation, the LA Food Policy Council, the attorneys at Public Counsel were critical to everything. but we didn't do it on our own. It was a lot of people working together around shared values. Any questions about that before I talk about COVID-19?
As Regina just put in the chat too, and it's something I was just thinking about, it's really focusing on the long game. It sounds like you guys put in a lot of work in the ground game and then just kind of had to wait around for the conditions to be right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, it is the long game. And I will say, folks that know me know that I'm extremely impatient. I mean, the call that I was on just now, right before this time with you all, I was like angry because they were taking forever to make a decision about something of this other program. And I think we need to move quick, you know? But I think what helped me, Aaron, to lean into the slowness of how things work was a collaboration, was that the people that we worked with, like, the staff at, ELAC, that some have moved on, like Janet Favela and Mike Dennis, and now currently Carla, the lawyers, Doug Smith and Katie McKeon, my team, Lyric, and then the folks that worked on before that, Luis, like these people, we had built like a solid relationship with them, like a friendship, an authentic relationship with them, despite our organizational affiliations. So even in the tough times, when the city council was punting our issue and took forever to schedule it in committees, we were still together. We were like, cool, we're still gonna meet up next week to plan. And what can we do to raise awareness about this? And it's hard, but it is a long game. But I think what helped impatient people like me was leaning on the collaboration. Because, you know, sometimes I can't be the energetic dude that's yelling. Like sometimes I'm tired.
I'm also kind of curious too, just hearing you tell that story. Like I've read a lot about the program, but hearing just sort of the sequence of it, wondering just like how many other threads like that do you have going at any given time? You know, how many other campaigns are in the process of being developed, and, you know, either that you're slowly moving forward or that are just, you guys are ready and waiting for the time to be right. And just, you know, did that campaign just work out because you put in all the hard work, you were ready, and then it happened, and there are a dozen things where the situation was the same, but it didn't materialize? Just kind of what's the success rate, you know, in that kind of organizing approach?
I think we're always thinking about like different things, you know, like I think that, you know, the street vendor campaign in the early year 1 and year 2 of it, it was like a ragtag group of people that didn't have trust in friendships like we do now. It was like we were kind of still scoping each other out. But I think that all of us had a commitment to listen to what people were experiencing on the ground. And so I think that has always been our North Star. And even so, that over time helped solidify the solidness of the street vendor campaign. I think there's always other subsidiary like issues and initiatives that we're thinking about, but you know, sometimes it takes a little while to germinate. One of the things that that we're working on right now, for example, Aaron, is we're part of this new coalition that came up out of the pandemic called Healthy LA, and I just put the link to the website in the chat. Healthy LA. It's over 300 organizations, and the way that it came about, it literally formed like 6 weeks ago, was that like a subset of friends that, you know, we all know each other, we're in this work together. They were like, hey, are your people like experiencing issues? Are you worried about evictions? And I'm like, yeah, we are, because we've been hearing it. Are you worried about like worker protections? Yeah, totally. That's something we've been thinking about. We've been in touch with folks. You know, we're worried about these things, and we're thinking about just getting together and writing down some things we want our elected officials to think about. And that has now morphed into this massive collaboration. But the key thing, the thread, was the connection to people. So it's not, so the Healthy LA thing, I think, has lifted off so quickly because all of us have been thinking about these things and kind of piecing them together. And when the window was available to us, we're like, all right, let's take advantage of it, you know? So like my colleague Lyric's on calls all day today because there's another city council meeting next week about this stuff. We want to push our Healthy LA platform. County supervisor meeting next Tuesday. And we're winning on some aspects. The city council on Wednesday voted on a very important right to recall law that basically is asking that businesses you know, invite their workers to come back based on seniority. We were worried that some folks were going to basically keep some of their workers laid off forever, and they were just going to hire younger folks that don't need as much pay. And so there's certain things that like that I don't know if I'm answering your question, Aaron, but basically what I'm saying is that there's always things in our mind. And one law or initiative that I've been thinking about for a while with my team is universal basic income. And let me use that as to talk about the emergency fund. Universal basic income is an idea that's been in our space for a few years, and a lot of tech titans have been talking about, wow, we really need to get people. The wages are dropping in our country. Automation is going to kill a lot of industry. We may have to start considering proposing a universal basic income, which is essentially like an automatic cash payment to everybody to take care of their basic needs. That the current wage system in our country is not taking care of folks. And so we've been thinking about this, and we're like, wow, we're seeing that we're ground truthing it with some of our folks, and they're working really hard and just can't make it. So when COVID-19 hit us, there was a lot of conversation about supporting small businesses with loans. And you all know that we're a lender. So, we're an advocate of loans because we think loans and access to capital is important. But when people were, the government was like, we need to get loans to small business help and survive, I was like, that's not a good idea. Because I know as a lender that the debt is a very helpful thing, but it could be very dangerous. And we are essentially saying to businesses to take on massive debt to survive for something that they didn't cause, okay? They didn't make any decisions about this. They didn't make a terrible business decision on anything. Something happened to them. And we're saying, in order for you to survive, take out some debt. And so we saw that with our street vendors, and we're like, no. So the first thing that we did in response to COVID-19 is we froze all our loan payments. Vendors were coming in to pay their loan payments, and we turned them away and said, you better keep that money. We are going to freeze all our loan payments to us at no cost to you for at least 3 months. And maybe we'll have to do it longer, but we need to figure out how we can work on getting cash assistance to people. And so within 48 hours, we froze our loan payments and then worked with some of our key partners in the campaign, ELAC and Public Counsel, again, collaboration, because we can't do everything. And we established the Street Vendor Emergency Fund, okay? What the Street Vendor Emergency Fund is doing is getting $400 cash cards to undocumented street vendors, because we knew that some sort of a cash assistance was coming, but it wasn't going to get to undocumented folks. And so we have been working really hard over the last month. We've raised about $235,000, $240,000, and a little bit more is coming that has been committed but hasn't been hit the fund yet. And we have already deployed 288 cash cards to street vendors. 288 vendors have received cash cards. And we're planning another deployment this coming week. This will be another 100 vendors probably will get cash cards. And we're working really hard at this. And so, this is an important programmatic thing. But Aaron, in response to your question, what I was thinking about with the emergency fund? I was thinking about universal basic income. I was thinking about how this is not just a programmatic thing, that we think that this is something that our people have always needed. And so this is an opportunity for us to work with our partners to educate our elected officials about how we can make some of these things permanent, not a temporary thing. Because folks, I think that my philosophy about nonprofits, and some of you may disagree, but I think we need to work ourselves out of a job. I think it's a shame that we have to spend so much time helping people with not enough resources. And I think that we have to build better systems that take care of folks. And so our hope with the emergency fund is not only provided some immediate relief, but to say, this is not enough. And we need to create some systems that takes care of people for the long term. And so that's what I think about that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking about it when you were just explaining it. It reminded me of that, like, luck favors the prepared quote, but you both got to be prepared, but you also have to have your eye out for the opportunity for when, like, the winds are blowing in your direction to say, like, here's the answer, it's right here, and we're ready to go.
So Aaron, one of the notes that came up, and Rudy, maybe you have some thoughts on this from Long Beach, this idea of I'm on the same page as you are, but how do you get people who aren't thinking about this to think about this instead of we'll get to it later? Because it occurred to me as you were talking that, our consultants work with a lot of networks, and that it sounded like, and maybe this will help Nico, think about it. It sounded like the early stage was just asking, what are you hearing? Maybe we have some common themes that are coming up with the people that we serve. Maybe we'd be better together than by ourselves. If we're thinking kind of how to really tackle an issue, we're going to have to do it with more than just our team. So the question is, how do you get people to not shuffle that to later in your organization if it's not top of the list now?
I think that, man, it's a good question, Nico. And I think that things always get shuffled because we work in an environment with competing priorities, you know? And I think that one of the things that I encourage and I talk a lot about with my team is about how much power we have as individuals and as small team members. And I think sometimes we feel that like we need to get a lot of people on board at the beginning to start something. And you may not need that, you know? So I guess, I don't know how to make people prioritize it, but I think that sometimes people just need the window. They need like the flashpoint. So Councilman Buscaino was not hosting the scheduling the committee for the street vendor legislation, but when Trump was elected, he saw the window and he was ready. And so now, do I wish that he would have done it a year or two ago? Yeah, a year before. Yeah, I would have loved that. That would have been amazing. But those are the hands that were the hand that was dealt to us, and so we had to work with it. But the key thing is that the small team that we had the platform ready to roll. So I guess my thought, Nico, is like, can you or maybe a very key ally or someone that you really trust, basically do a little bit of the heavy lifting in the beginning and put together the platform, put it on paper, you know, call a friend, call me and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Help me just finish this draft and then present it. And if they say, oh, well, this is not a priority right now, then you may have to keep holding it, but just, you know, at least you did a little work, keep pushing it, you know, the window will come, I think, especially if it's not about you, you know. Like, I think that helps me in my work as as a fundraiser and a nonprofit person, is it's not about me. I don't care about, it's not about Rudy. It's not about me pitching these ideas. I'm just sharing with you all what people are saying on the streets. I'm just sharing what Don Faustino has been telling me, who's featured in that article, or Caridad, who's one of our vocal leaders. They're the ones that are saying this is not me. So if you want to ignore them, cool, but I'm letting you know, don't shoot the messenger. But Nico, I want to invite you, if you do have ideas, I'm here. I mean, I'm pretty open source. So like, I might not be like a co-author with you, but I'm happy to be just like as a, you know, an ally, a secret ally, you know, and I think we all need to do that for each other to kind of push each other. I see Julie had a good comment about, and Laurence has his hand up, I think too, about the PPP being forgivable. She is absolutely correct, folks. PPP has a forgivable clause. The issue that I had with some of my clients, Julie, is that they're undocumented, so they don't qualify for PPP. The other challenge, the other barrier is that as we're hearing and learning, the PPP process kind of perpetuates some of the systemic inequalities that we have in our system, because the folks that got PPP are the ones that have connections, they had an existing bank relationship. So what I've been telling people and using these stories to tell elected officials, anybody who'll listen, is that, hey, PPP is a great program. It's, in theory, it's amazing. We should do loans that are forgivable. Amazing, good. But can we just focus on making sure that the delivery system is better and more equitable? You know, can we make sure that folks that don't have the connections that I might have an opportunity to get in? You know, can we loosen the requirements? So if there's an undocumented entrepreneur that can really use that PPP loan, can they get in line too? You know?
Yeah. Laurence, what's on your mind?
You've got to find a way to scale your model up. In the Black community, there are so many small mom and pop operations that are working to stay alive, not thinking at all about cooperating to get things done. They're kind of competing for the same thing. And you're not going to get that big action doing it that way.
Laurence, I 100% agree with you. I wish I could give you a hug, but I can't because we're in a pandemic, dude. I think that you're right, that we cannot scale. That's why I think we need to work ourselves out of a job and put some systems in place to make this scale. Because I know that if the government worked really well, they can get cash assistance to people right away at something much broader and bigger than anything that I could do. So like, I 100% agree with the scale issue. I feel like I've kind of let it go because I feel like I'm not going to be able to scale it with my small organization. But what I can do is tell the story about what's going on. I could demonstrate proof of concept, you know? So for example, the Los Angeles, the county is thinking about cash assistance, Laurence. They want to do a cash assistance card. Well, guess what? We've been doing it so we can share with them our lessons and say, hey, this is how you should do it. Please take it off our hands. Do it better, do it bigger. The scalability thing can be done through our public sector. That's my opinion.
What other questions we got? Looks like Nico added another question from Long Beach. What do you say / how do you educate board members who say that our nonprofit status prevents us from lobbying and that we can't reframe the conversation that you're having, you know, which is an advocacy-based conversation?
Yeah, great question, Nico. I've had a lot of experience working with boards, my own and others. And in this case, if I were you, I would say, board, I appreciate you being concerned about us. Would it be helpful if I brought an attorney to help educate us about what we can do and what we can't do? And then I would call public counsel or a legal aid foundation and say, hey, homies, can you come over here and educate my board about what the law says? And the law will say that you can be an advocate. Now, there's limits, of course, Nico. I mean, I think that the board is right in being worried, but I always believe that knowledge is power and education is key, you know? And so my board at times has been like, I don't know, Rudy, are you sure you're gonna do that? And I'm like, hey, if you're worried, like you're the fiscal stewards, you know? So let's get in some authorities that tell us what we can do and what we can't do, you know? Let me hit a Center for Nonprofit Management, you know? Let me get Regina in here to do that.
Well, I was gonna say, you know, Nico, I'm so glad you asked that question. And Rudy, you are so right. So much of what we hear from organizations about the red flags, we're not allowed to lobby, we're not allowed to do this, we're a nonprofit, it's gonna put our nonprofit status at risk. Most likely, none of that is true for what you're talking about today. You know, we have in the nonprofit sector as a tax exempt organization operating in the US within the state of California, a lot of room. And in fact, I would say most likely, you know, we have a quick one pager that we can share with you. We have colleagues that spend their days on this that have provided information that we can share with you. But the takeaway really is, to Rudy's point, most of the examples that he described were about information, right? That if a government entity is going to make a decision about something that you know a lot about, you are, as a nonprofit, allowed to talk about that. This is what we're seeing on the ground. This is, if you're thinking A versus B, A would be more helpful. What you're not allowed to do as a 501c3 is say, we are going to support this candidate. We are going to drive this initiative and we're going to tell you vote yes on prop whatever. You know, then you have to just declare it, that you've moved into that lobbying space. And, you know, you call one part of your organization a lobbying organization. But most likely, if we could demystify this, you know, we are afraid of ghosts that aren't there. You know, the laws allow us, and I feel kind of there's a moral imperative. To Rudy's point, the biggest dollars are government dollars. They are going to make decisions about what will or will not help the population you're trying to serve. You are the content expert. And some of you may know, I spent a lot of time in Sacramento on the government policymaking side, and I can tell you, we're counting on you when we're sitting in those rooms to tell us what would matter for people, because the guys on the other side that are well funded are in those rooms telling them what to do. So we need you to be in those rooms. And we need you to tell them this is what's going to matter on the streets with the people that we serve. And the reason why we wanted to talk about this today is that we're pretty worried that a lot of smaller groups that are most familiar what will help or hurt people of color that are always left behind in these policy choices are counting on nonprofit organizations that now are finding themselves in more vulnerable positions. So we've got to figure out ways where we can kind of meet around the table at Starbucks and just talk about, what are you seeing? What could we do together? What do we want those supervisors to know? Or your assembly person, you know, that's going to count on you to vote for them next time. You're allowed to say, this is what's happening in my neighborhood. You guys ought to know about this. And then, you know, when you really get focusing on policy change, I can tell you it's going to matter a lot when you can have the first 3 rows in the Hall of Administration filled with voices and faces they don't usually see. You know, if you know, this is a moment for all of us to decide what we're trying to do in communities and how we could maybe be stronger if we work together. And you know, Rudy, I think because you're so good at this, it might be intimidating for people that haven't thought about this. But boy, I can tell you exactly what you described, which is it matters a lot when somebody can say, let me tell you about this guy that came up with the money to do the ice cream truck. How did he get there? What's getting in the way of him being able to take care of his family? And just make it real, you know?
Yeah, I think
and all
Regina,
of the nonprofit leaders know this stuff.
well, Regina, I appreciate you creating space for this, because I think that a lot of us have these sort of doubts about what's possible. And it almost makes me wonder if, like, there's a lot more people that are not on this call that are worried about this, and like maybe we should do something about it. The center do something about it, just creating a space, because man, I think that there's so much power in our sector, and because of the people that we're connected with and the stories that we hear, and it's just not elevated enough, and we could do a lot better. And part of it is getting over the fear and really being empowered with knowledge about what's possible and what's not. You know, I think, I don't want to get super political on this thing, but you know, one of the things when this president was elected, one of the things that they did was, or he was interested in, I think he did do this, is he lifted restrictions on churches, on faith-based organizations and their lobbying efforts. And I was like, well, dude, that's, I mean, yeah, because I think that there's a lot of fear that, you know, he wanted to activate a certain base. I think that we can do, even within the laws currently, activate our base in a way that we haven't done before, you know? And just knowing the information, connecting with the center, connecting with other people to say, just tell me, I can't communicate with my board, but a third party could. It's helped me in my board in saying, instead of me being the messenger, just saying, hey, I'm just gonna bring in someone unbiased that's just gonna give us the information.
Yeah, those are all such smart strategies. And I
I saw
agree.
that-
I think there's a moment. It sounds like we've got more people asking questions. So,
sorry, Laurence, we'll get back to you in a second. But Rudy, I was wondering if you could speak to Steph K's question about, you know, digital divide, and especially with a lot of the, you know, the community that you're supporting probably doesn't have a ton of access to the internet, and that's something that has become an increasing issue, especially with schools going remote and seeing sort of which communities don't have access to the internet, who doesn't have laptops. Just curious how that affects your organizing approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think that sometimes we don't recognize that a lot of people do have access in some way. Like, they have smartphones. A lot of people have smartphones, and most people do. Now, do they know how to use them? That's a whole different story, but they have access to the tools. I think what Steph brought up in the chat is really important, especially during this time, this pandemic, because a couple weeks ago, we were getting, after the first of the month, we were getting calls from some of our clients, street vendors and others, saying, I'm really worried that my cell phone's going to get cut off because I can't pay the bill. And we were just stressed because we were like, oh shoot, that means that they can't call anybody. That means that they can't interact with their family members because they can't see each other because they should be social distancing. How will they pay their other bills if they can, you know, like if they don't have a cell phone? And so I think these stories, I put in the chat here that everyone on is a nonprofit that works on these things. I think the more that we aggregate these stories and share with our elected officials to do things, I think that's, again, the advocacy work. It's saying, hey, this is what I'm hearing on the street. Council member, assembly member, congressperson, can you help us? Can you think about how we can make sure people stay connected during this time? Because if my cell phone was out, team, oh my God, I'd be so stressed. Like, how do I do anything, you know? And so, I think it's an important topic, you know? But you know what's funny? I just want to highlight again the connections to the community and the power of our stories, because how would we have thought about it if people didn't tell us, you know? It's like if that person didn't call us and said, I'm worried about the T-Mobile bill, like that ended up opening up a door. And then we started asking other people and we're like, oh shit, this is a big deal, you know? So connection to community and leveraging that is really key.
Yeah. Laurence, what else are you wondering about?
Two things. Number one, going back to the boards, I think a lot of board members are learning that they need to do the advocacy. They've never considered that part of their job. Their job is to raise money, find other people to get money, and maybe to help administer the center. They haven't thought about the terms of advocacy. They don't feel comfortable in that environment. The second thing, I'm concerned about what's going to happen in the future. All the times it takes a disaster to show the inequality in society. This is going to be over at some point. Are we going to go back to where we were before?
Laurence, you and I have to kick it, man, after this is over. So I just want to highlight what he said about especially the post-pandemic thing here, you know, because we are in relief mode, getting cash cards to vendors, and that's fine. But we have to think together, team, as a group about what is the future that we want. So I want to highlight, since we're talking about advocacy on this Lunch and Learn, that on Tuesday, the county supervisors are meeting together to figure out how they could help people. And item 20 on the agenda is a recovery. They're calling it the roadmap to recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a plan, it's a proposal. And I think all of us should just take a look at it if you're in LA County and just be like, is this what you think we need? I think they have a lot of great stuff in there. But I bet you if you read it, given your experience, you might have something to add. And if you call them, they may be like, oh, wow, I've never heard from this person before. This is a really important thing. So I was working on that last night, providing my comments, working with the coalition to say, hey, how do we lift this up? And one of the key things, and I think Laurence would agree with this, is we don't want to go back to where we were.
Oh,
We don't, you know, it sucked before this, you know? We have an opportunity to do something better, to not only recover, we need a just recovery. We need something that's going to get us to a better place. And right now our elected officials are listening because they're worried and they need our help.
Yeah. Curious, Regina, if you can speak to the board side of that at all. I know that, you know, our board has been a lot more active and engaged in the last month or so. And I know that we're in the process of compiling our data from our sector snapshot, but it's looking like, you know, one of the few positive things that's been happening to organizations so far is that boards are just becoming a lot more engaged. Curious, speak to that trend and sort of what that engagement is looking like.
Yeah, you know, a couple things. Number one, board members are always kind of unclear about how to help, right? They don't want to get in the way. If it's a competent ED, you know, just let them do their job. And if you don't ask for anything, they'll go back to their jobs, right? They're volunteers and they have other things to do. But boy, during moments like this is the time to have your wish list ready about this is where it would be helpful if you would do X, whatever X is. The other thing, to Rudy's earlier point, you know, the workforce in LA County alone in the nonprofit sector is 1 million people. If even half of those voices could talk about what was going to matter with the people that they serve, it will change the conversation with your neighbors, with the choices they make for voting. That's advocacy. That's not lobbying. That's talking about what matters, you know? So some of the intimidation about we're not allowed to lobby, really, you just have to understand the difference between advocacy work and lobbying work. Lobbying work we're most likely never going to do for most organizations that listen to this call. But I think for board members to really, if they decided, this is, I'll end with this thought, you know, if they said yes to serving on your board, there was something about your mission that resonated for them. And if they really want to do what Rudy and I both wish for, which is, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could really solve this, if we could make things better for people so these organizations could go away because they weren't needed anymore. You know, get the board fired up about how they can help to come, you know, decide on the message and then go spread it. And if that means calling an elected official and just leaving a message that says, this is what we're seeing in Boyle Heights, this is what we're seeing in South LA or West LA, doesn't matter, you know, but it is especially meaningful. I get it, Rudy, when you and I get paid to do this all day, right? When somebody that's a volunteer says, let me tell you what I know, and let me tell you what would make a difference, because this is what we're hearing in my nonprofit, it matters in a whole different way. And I really think right now, everybody that I'm talking to, business leaders, government leaders, nonprofit leaders, you know, corporate social responsibility folks, everybody's struggling with how they can help and do something meaningful with the resources that they have available, because the needs are so big and we're all so intimidated and overwhelmed. So rather than get stuck in the fear, give people something to do, suggest some things. So I'm all in on that one.
Absolutely. Well put. We're just about at the end of our hour, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If anybody has any last minute burning questions, I think now would be the time to ask them. Yes, Janet, what's on your mind?
Thank you for unmuting me there. So just a question in general with this is, how does all of this compare to like what CAN is doing or what United Ways of California is doing? There is the big advocacy. So how does these other efforts, are they different than what they're doing?
Well, not necessarily, Janet. I think that, you know, United Way of Greater LA actually invested in our Street Vendor Emergency Fund. They were the first investor. And they are Everyone In, their Everyone In campaign is part of the Healthy LA Coalition. LA Can is part of our coalition. But I will say that, you know, everybody has a little secret sauce to how they do the work, right? It's like a baseball team or a basketball team. Someone's better at defense or someone's better at offense. Everyone plays a little different role. So they all, even though we're working together, they add their own little extra expertise. And so I just want to give, I think it's a really good question. We are in touch, but they're also like moving things in their own special way. And I think that that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add, you know, this is the time to communicate, right? It's not either or. It's definitely keep an eye on what CAN's doing. Let them know what you're seeing. Keep an eye on what United Way is doing. Get involved if that fits for your mission. And if there's something complementary that I think there's no wrong road at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And then there may be some things that don't fit in their path that does matter to you. Where if you're in the Inland Empire and you're seeing something in the community that would matter in your zip code, you know, it's talking to other folks in the area and saying, maybe we could do something together, help each other out, and the community would be better off. So I think it's kind of one of those, keep the radar, you know, constantly circling, you know. Good question though, because no, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we should be learning from each other, and where they're really good at it, to Rudy's point, just support them. You know, we don't have to carry the water for everything. You know, there are people that do that all day. I know we're a little bit over time. Rudy, thanks so much for this. And Aaron, I'll turn it back to you.
No, that was it. I was just going to thank Rudy as well. I hope this has been helpful for everyone. We'll be posting a recording of this on our website. We've got all of these webinars and a bunch of resources listed that we're updating all the time. Sorry, I'm trying to pull a link up and talk at the same time, which is not the best thing to do. But here's CNM's webpage that has a bunch of different COVID resources, including relief funds and recordings of all of our weekly lunch and learns and other webinars. We're going to have a couple of different webinars coming up next week. There's a bunch more PPP funding coming online. So we're going to be doing another session on PPP specifically, and do you reapply, do you wait in the queue, all of that, as well as some HR staffing concern kind of questions. And yeah, with that, we'll kick close this off today. Again, thank you, Rudy, for telling your story. I hope that was helpful for everyone. I certainly learned a lot. And hope everyone has a great weekend and stay safe and healthy.
See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Aaron, did you get that?
COVID-19, we are very clear that you should not be preparing or serving food. And we want to continue with that message, which is why it's so important now that we know that there are asymptomatic people who could be positive, to make sure that, again, in places where there are essential workers, we're going to be able to, those employers are going to be able to help those employees get testing in a situation where you know you have positive cases already in your restaurant. In terms of, you know, how safe do I think takeout is, I've said from the very beginning, I think it's very safe. I think the reason I say that is there's there's still all of our guidelines around, they're not really guidelines, they're directives around safety and food preparation, and those are still in effect. Just because it's takeout doesn't mean that there's been any ability for any of the restaurants or food processing plants or food preparing sites to not implement fully all of the infection control processes that are in place. So I do think it's safe. I think people can continue to safely pick up and take out from your favorite restaurants. We will be working again with all of the restaurants around making sure that they continue to implement all of the infection control processes, which when they're done well, do protect all of us, what we call, they're like universal precautions, and they protect all of us from the transmittal of other kinds of infections as well as COVID-19. But we'll take the next question.
That comes from the line of Annabelle Munoz, ABC7. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. The first one is regarding the new health order that you mentioned, Dr. Ferrer. Does that also apply to any sort of detention centers, jails, prisons? And then my second question is regarding a statement made by the president about the possibility of injecting disinfectant as it relates to COVID-19. He since said that he was being sarcastic, but it has prompted disinfectant manufacturers to issue warnings against this. So has the county received any increasing questions about this, and what is your message to residents?
Yeah, thank you so much, especially for bringing up sort of some misinformation that was circulating yesterday. Please don't inject, ingest, or even put on your body any disinfectants that you're using for cleaning purposes. It's completely inappropriate, and it's extraordinarily dangerous. That's not what those products are meant for, and there's absolutely no scientific evidence that indicates that they would either be safe or that they can help prevent you from becoming infected, or if you are infected, they're not a therapeutic medicine to help you get better. So I'm so grateful for all of the disinfectant companies for making sure that they also put out that message. You know, people die from ingesting some of these products. So I really hope everyone understands if the president was being sarcastic, it doesn't really matter. The most important thing right now is that people have good information that they really shouldn't use those products for anything except for cleaning. And even now you're going to read both on our websites and on other people's websites to be careful when you're cleaning that you don't inadvertently mix some products that really can't be safely mixed as you're doing your cleaning. Some of these products are harsh and they're extraordinarily dangerous. So thank you for bringing that up. And yes, we do want to make sure that the public understands that that information wasn't accurate, and please don't act on it. And your first question was, oh yeah, does the health officer, no, the health officer order really applies only to what we call long-term care facilities. I do want to note that we work very closely with the jails, with the sheriff's office, and with the Department of Health Services to make sure that there are similar controls in place in those settings to make them as safe as possible. That's particularly around infection control, quarantine, and isolation. But the health officer order is for long-term care facilities. So thanks for that question. We'll take the next question.
That comes from the line of Claudia Pisciuta, KNS News Radio. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I have a few questions. Will the order mandating testing be expanded to shelters Also, on the new confirmed cases, do you know how much of that is backlog and how much is actual new cases being reported today? Will we be getting an update on the healthcare worker numbers? And any thoughts to expanding the testing for asymptomatic people to in-home supportive services workers and other caregivers working with high-risk people in their homes? Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. I'm going to let Dr. Galley answer the questions about the testing for other workers. The question about, I'll start with, I think the first question. Let me just make sure I have it down. Sorry. So we are starting, there's over 350 skilled nursing homes in LA County. And that's our main focus right now. And I'll say why it's our main focus. It's because, as you know, 40% of our deaths are from people who are dying, who are residents in the skilled nursing facilities. So we've got to get out there, and we've got to get out there quickly and make sure we're doing everything we can to create a safe situation for both employees and for residents. There are some sites, and I think Dr. Galley could talk to this as well, some of the larger shelters where we've already been doing some testing, but it's not covered under this order. So I just want to be clear, this order again is for long-term care facilities. And that's a major focus because of the fact that we have a lot of outbreaks. As you know, you can see in our list of facilities where we're doing investigations. An update on the healthcare workers, that will come on Monday. So we try to do that every Monday. And then